The internet is unusable, the disabled view. I think some of you know what I'm going to say in general, but um, first, for those who don't know me, I've been doing accessibility consultation for a long time, about 30 years now. And basically, I help organizations make sure that they build things that work for disabled people. I should note the images on my slides are purely decoration, so I won't describe them from that perspective. In the early days of accessibility, pretty much it was quote unquote just for blind folks. There was a side dish of deaf community. Obviously, if you can't hear, it's hard to perceive content that doesn't have captions or audio. It's a little bit like in the built environment, accessibility is often perceived as just for wheelchair users. And it's so far from the truth because there's so much more to the built environment accessibility than access for wheelchair users. And it's the same thing in the digital space. But really, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and both the blind and the deaf community, rightly so, complain about the state of the web. And that's where I think most of our awareness of accessibility started back in the 90s. And I date myself by saying this. I was there, I remember it. There was a lot of stuff to consider back then, but we were looking at screen readers. And the funny thing is that we still hear a lot about web accessibility is just for blind people. We still have this really strong emphasis on screen readers. And let's face it, making things work for screen reader users is a large part of the work we're doing in accessibility. And it should be because it is a critical aspect of what we do. So I'm not bashing screen reader users in this presentation, far from it. But we do have other aspects of accessibility. Just like we have to make audio and video accessible to deaf folks, that makes sense. Just like wheelchair users in the built environment, that makes sense. But there is much more to it than that. And for the last several years, it's been bugging me. It's that kind of thing where I'm thinking, why are we not evolving from here? In part, there's this aspect of I've actually been teaching my clients about alt text for images for 30 years. And sure, I get it. Not everybody's at the same stage, but I would also like us to evolve from there. So over the years, I started talking to more and more people and highlighted some accessibility aspects that are not necessarily obvious. I've done a lot of usability studies with disabled people over the years. And even though I've been in this field for a long time, pretty much every time I have a conversation about web accessibility for my podcast, or I do a usability study, I learn something new about accessibility. And that to me is really powerful. You don't want to remain stagnant doing the same thing over and over. So I'm going to share some of these stories with you. I'm going to share some of these aspects of accessibility that are not immediately obvious. And I'm going to use disabled people's words to do that. Because, it's so important to hear those words from the people that are most impacted by accessibility. A couple of years ago, I interviewed a deaf guest for my podcast. Turns out it was the first time she'd been invited to a guest on a show, on a podcast. Nobody else had thought that providing accommodations, figuring out how to make it happen, actually can make it work. She had amazing insights to share. This really brilliant person did not have a chance to share her experience because no other podcaster thought about making it worth for her as a guest, for other people who have hearing disabilities. And this is true for guests and audience members. So when we're thinking about accessibility in terms of, well, it goes beyond providing captions, it goes beyond screen reader users, it goes beyond keyboard users. What are we looking at? We have to start thinking, and I hate this cliche, but I'm going to use it anyway. We have to think outside the box. We have to try and reimagine what we do, how we do it, and what we know. One of the usability studies I ran told me, a participant, she told me she could not do the usability test. I mean, we loaded the first page and everything got stopped. The corporate colors of the website was primarily red. There was red all over the place. She had been selected as a participant for this usability study because she was a traumatic brain injury survivor. She'd had to relearn everything: reading, walking, speaking, everything. She also had to learn that the color red means stop. That had an impact on her use of the web. Obviously, this is not something that's very obvious. Just as obviously, the company couldn't change their corporate colors because of this one bit of feedback. But anecdotes like this should influence our work. We need to pay attention to these kind of things, because if we don't, then we're ignoring a large segment of our population. We're ignoring people who may not have the opportunity to express themselves. They may not have the reach on social media to say what they want to say. They may not have the ability or desire to expose themselves as having a disability and be talking about the impact sometimes quote unquote small issues may have on their lives. And I firmly believe that, you know, if we exclude even one person in our community, we're not a community at all. So we really want to spread this kind of access. Of course, there's this expression, which I'm sure some of you have heard. It's been something very, very strong in the disability community for a long time. Nothing about us without us. This presentation is not just a little bit, it's a lot about that. Non-disabled accessibility experts can tell you about how important accessibility is. And that's important. That perspective is very important. But there's so much power to hearing what people experience in their own words. And as every disabled web user can tell you, the web is unusable. WebAIM, our conference host, have this fantastic Million report, and I think the latest number is out of the top 1 million homepage on the web, there's an average of 57 accessibility defect on each homepage. 57 per page. That's a lot, and that will have an impact on user. The thing is, though, we can fix that. We find ourselves in a unique place. We are the designers, we are the developers, we are the stakeholders that have control over that work. We can learn from disabled people. We can make the web a better place. And you attending this conference is a good indication that you want to make that happen. So let's make the web more usable for everyone. I'll be sharing other examples of aspects of accessibility that are rarely considered because sometimes all that's needed is awareness. One of my podcast listeners said once, I can't unhear and ignore these things anymore. So between my podcasts and anecdotes from usability studies, I could share dozen, maybe hundreds of insights. We don't have a whole week, so I'm going to keep them short. I'm going to refrain myself. I'll share a few things from the 4 main disability groups. I'll focus on hearing, on mobility, on vision, and of course on cognitive impairments, which is a group that has historically been ignored, but more and more we hear about that, and I think it's important for us to highlight that. So let's start with vision. We're often aware of the need of screen reader users. Obviously, you know, we ARIA all the things to make sure that, you know, our users can reach there. And when I say ARIA all the things, I hope you hear the sarcasm in my voice. But I think it goes beyond just, can this person use this website with a screen reader? It's about how do we describe makeup to someone who's blind? Kirsty Major told me about going shopping, but the color names on the website were very fancy, like Plum in the Evening or Hawaiian Sunset or Sunrise on the Nile. So she said, and I'll let you hear her in her own words.
I could read all the products, I could buy them. There was nothing wrong with the way that the page was set up, but the names of things had nothing to do with what color they were, so I had no idea what I was actually buying.
I think that's, that is, for me, one of these things we don't think about when we're doing accessibility. It's going the extra mile to make sure that the things we build are not only just technically accessible, but also usable. And forgive me, I need to have a sip of water. Another screen reader user, Michelle McWage, was telling me how she can't do her job if there's no alt text on images on social media. She's a journalist, and she does most of her sifting for articles and news stories through social media. Now, I've been advocating for alt text for a very long time, but the idea that someone couldn't actually do their job because alt text was missing on Twitter, it was so obvious, but it escaped me. And I bet you that a lot of us in the accessibility field had never considered that before. So Michelle said,
the photos, possibly even more so, because that's something I encounter for work all the time. People will post official statements on their Twitter feed, and it's a friggin' image, and I can't read it. I need to be able to do that. So whether it's anything from an amusing meme to actual content that I need to do my job.
That just, it makes sense. It's obvious. But until you think about it, it's not obvious. And it's the same for, for us. If you're a consultant for the clients you work with, if you're someone new to accessibility or learning about accessibility, it's this kind of thing. It's the things that you don't know, and that suddenly they become obvious, and you can't unsee them, you can't unhear it. You have to start paying attention to that. Amy Carney isn't a screen reader user. She has low vision, and one of the barriers she encounters on the web are sticky elements. We speak, Amy and I, about sticky elements all the time, but here's what Amy has to say.
Sticky headers, sticky footers, sometimes even the little help icons on the side that stay in place. It all blocks my view because I have to enlarge my type a little bit sometimes when I'm zooming in. through the browser, and it all bumps together really fast.
Sticky elements, my friends, just don't do it. Just don't do it. I say that to my clients all the time, and I'm going to say that to you. It's just such a hassle for so many people. Now, here's one that isn't unknown, or at least it shouldn't be. But it's so very important, especially considering how many people are using mobile to navigate the way. Mobile first. And I know a lot of people now that are mobile only. They don't even own a computer. Maybe their bigger screen is going to be a tablet. So Ian Litman tells us how limiting zooming on a page makes it hard for him to use the page. Now, Ian has low vision, so he's also not a screen reader user, but it's in the realm of the continuum of vision impairments.
Websites will, particularly on a mobile view, enforce a maximum zoom level where you do a viewport min 1, max 1 or something like that, where they absolutely lock out zoom controls. That becomes an issue as well, particularly if you're dealing with fine print on the site or images that you can't expand. If your site disallows that functionality via, again, meta tags on the viewport, then I'm out of luck.
He's out of luck. How many times have we heard that? I'm out of luck. I'm locked out. I can't do this. These are things beyond, and I know I say this a lot, but these are things beyond WCAG, 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 however you pronounce the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They are the starting point. They are not the target. We don't want to leave our users out of luck just because maybe they have an access need that is not so common that they were able to be codified by a group of 50 people with sometimes different agendas and different perspective and experiences. Now, switching from vision to hearing, Meryl, who was a presenter on this conference, often talks about craptions, that is, captions that are crap. Good quality captions are important, and she points out if you notice the caption, they're not good.
You depend on captions every day. You become accustomed to what works and what doesn't work. If we notice the caption, it's a sign they're not good quality. Just like editing is part of the publishing process, please make accessibility part of your entire process.
Make accessibility part of your entire process. I could not say this louder or more often because it's the only path for success. If you're doing accessibility, if you treat it as a project, as a one-off, or if you treat it as, hey, it's something for the devs to do, or hey, it's something we're going to check at quality assurance step, you're going to fail. And it's not just a question of providing something, it's a question of how you provide it. If you notice the accessibility features, it means they're not good quality. You can do better than that. Mel Chua, who's also deaf, pointed out it's not the job of disabled folks to ask for accommodation or accessibility. These should be there from the get-go. Otherwise, it's othering disabled folks. And here's what Mel had to say.
Even beyond that it's my job to request, that it's my job to find something, and then it's this wonderful, generous favor they're doing me to allow me to have access to those things by providing transcripts later, several days later, several weeks later, however long it takes to do that.
So there's this concept of time. How long does it take to make something happen? One of the things I do for my podcast is I will not publish an episode until I have a manually edited transcript. I think that's, if you don't do that, you might as well not do anything at all. And yet so many podcasts don't even provide a transcript, or those that do provide a transcript, they will push the audio version and then they say, oh, we're working on the transcript, and it take 2, 3, 4 days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. And how is that equitable? How is that inclusive? To know that, hey, I can hear, therefore I can access this before my friends that may be deaf or hard of hearing, or maybe they have audio processing issues. So this timing part of accessibility is of something we don't think about, we don't talk about very often. But it goes back to what Meryl was talking about, this idea to have accessibility as part of the entire process allows you to reach a point where you're ready to release that website, release that new feature. It's accessible. You don't have to say, oh, okay, we released this, but we're still working on accessibility. Timing is important. Disabled people, we want to have access to the same thing as non-disabled people at the same time. So we often advertise the need for programmatic labels so screen reader users can know what a field is all about. Really important. But folks using speech input software like Tori Clark, they think and they say and they know that a visible label is as important as a programmatic one. Side note, before I let Tori say what she has to say, this is where having the visible label and the programmatic label match is just really critical. Anyway.
It's a lack of visual labels or a mismatch between the visual label and the accessible name of the label. In particular, old versions of Dragon also require that the first word of the actual accessible label be the visual label. Otherwise, I have no idea how to interact with or click buttons or form fields or even certain types of links.
Now, Tori is talking about older versions of Dragon, and this podcast episode was recorded in 2019, I think, 2020. So a few years ago. Technology evolves. Technology evolves rapidly, but we still have people using old software on old platform. It was true and is to some level still true with screen reader users who often, especially in the United States, where that's my experience, have assistive technologies founded by DHS, Department of Human Services, and DHS is pretty stuck in providing one thing. And I know someone who was using a version of JAWS for years and years and years because DHS was not going to buy a new version of JAWS, and there was no way he could afford over $1,000 for this assistive software. So when we're developing things for the latest and greatest browser, and we're using cutting edge technology and we have to remember that disabled people are underemployed or unemployed, often live well below poverty limit. And when we have to apply, sorry, I got distracted. The interpreter screen had fireworks going, so that was a bit weird. Anyway, back on track. ADHD is wonderful sometimes. Hey, Shiny. we have to remember that disabled people can't always purchase the latest piece of hardware, the latest assistive technology, and making things backward compatible is critical. And from this perspective, even though Tori was talking about an older version of Dragon that requires that the first word of a label is also visible, there's a lot of people that are going to be in that situation. Now, speech input software like Dragon might be relatively well known, but it's not the only way to interact with the computer without a keyboard or a mouse. Folks also use eye tracking technology. Thane Pullen has CP. He uses eye tracking and switches rather than keyboard. And he says that he's got problems with CAPTCHAs, but also with pop-up menus. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, Thane is actually using software to speak his words because his speech is hard to understand for people that are not familiar with him. So here's Thane.
Pop-up menus are horrible for eye tracking. Most eye tracking users probably can't use them. You have to keep your mouse in an area from them not too close.
Pop-up menus, I struggle with that. I put my mouse cursor on it and then it opens and I go to use a sub-menu item and suddenly the whole menu disappears, poof. And I don't have any barriers to using a mouse. So I can imagine how frustrating it would be for someone who has not an extra cognitive load, but an extra barriers because they're dealing with using eye tracking and a switch to make something happen. And that just makes everything demanding more effort and it's tiring. And why don't we make it easier for people? This idea that the web should be usable, yes, it's important. It's also important for saving people physical and mental energy in terms of, if it takes me 5 minutes to do a process on a web application and it takes Thane an hour because of the way he has to interact, why do we make it even harder by an interface that is not really solid? And anyway, you get my point. Ellen Spertus has tremors, and most accessibility issues that we often don't think about have relatively straightforward fixes. Ellen has been telling me for a few years that show hide password on password fields is really important. Without that, because of her tremors, she ends up being incredibly frustrated sometimes when entering password, especially on her phone.
And something that's frustrating is entering a password. I have to do that a lot. We all have to do that a lot, even if we use password managers. And sometimes when I access a site, I don't know if I have the right password. And when I type in a password on my phone, I might hit the wrong key. And if the password field is hidden, then I don't know if my password was refused because I entered the wrong password or because I accidentally pressed the wrong key.
I think this has happened to most of us at one point or another, this frustration of, hey, why is my password not working? But when you have tremors, and this is something that happens to you on just about every website where you have to enter a password and you don't know if it's the right password or not, it just creates more of that cognitive load that just is very hard. Now, switching from that to cognitive impairments, we speak less about them, we know less about them, even though we're we're starting to build a general awareness of the needs out there. I think they are critical in the next steps of where we're going with accessibility, especially when you start considering the very high level of people who have developed cognitive impairments through long COVID. I don't think we speak about that aspect enough, and we really have to start considering cognitive impairments more. Now, Kevin Marmolinero is dyslexic. He was telling me how he relies on being able to highlight text on the web and then copy paste it. Here's how Kevin illustrates a particular problem.
I rely very heavily on, if I'm doing something, copying and pasting out. So let's say, and I've got a postcode and I want to find out where something is. A lot of people will make those clickable links which open in a specific app. The minute I go to copy it, it opens in an app, or it copies all the metadata behind it, and I can't just paste that into the thing I want to paste it in.
So we do these things, we stop the ability of copy pasting under this weird fear that someone is going to steal our content. And sure, some people do steal our content by copy pasting it. But the reality is, someone is determined enough, they will steal your content, whether you stop copy pasting or not. So why use a technique that actually stop genuine people, genuine users from accessing your content and perceiving your content and being to understand your content? Is just, we shouldn't do that. And I'm sure if we start thinking a little bit about, hey, what other things do we do because we've always done it this way, because this guru or that influencer is saying this is the way we need to do it, and suddenly we have to question what we do. Just this morning, I read something that Jacob Nielsen was talking about some of the good stuff you have to do. And one of the things he was pointing out is making it clear that there's going to be vertical or horizontal scrolling. And I'm thinking, why is someone who has been so strong, who has such an influence on UX and UI, still talking about recommending horizontal scrolling? I don't get it. But in our line of work, we meet that every day. We encounter things that are done this way because they've always been done this way. We have people that are still saying, hey, don't put anything below the fold. Don't put anything important below the fold. Well, yeah, maybe in the early 2000s this was true, but web users have evolved since then. And having some kind of vertical scrolling is fine. But when you're starting to talk about horizontal scrolling, then you make things so difficult for so many people. So it's the same thing. Question everything. Even question me. I welcome that. Challenge me at the end in the Q&A. So we've heard a lot about brain fog. I've mentioned the pandemic. I've mentioned long COVID. In and of itself, brain fog is a problem. But if you have brain fog and chronic pain, it makes everything so much more difficult. Giulia Ferraioli was telling me about frustrating experiences on the web for her.
It feeds this kind of vicious cycle because as you're getting more frustrated, also frustration can amplify pain. Yeah. So more pain, less fine motor control, more frustration, and rinse, repeat.
How many of us have actually considered that the interface we build actually cause pain, physical pain, to people like Giulia? How many of our clients realize that flashing content can cause migraines or seizures in our end users? These are the things we don't really think about too often. And I'm sure nobody wants to cause pain to end users. So, yeah. Now, sometimes we think we're doing the right thing, and it's often the right thing for some people. This is where I consider accommodation conflict. Like for me, a polished concrete floor is wonderful as a wheelchair user. But I have friends that use canes to walk, and let me tell you, they swear polished concrete is so dangerous for them, especially if it's been raining and it's a little slick. So this is a accommodation conflict. Dark mode is a little bit like that. And Sherry Thompson talks about how if it's got too much control, it's bad for them.
Things like dark mode or websites that have much too much contrast, or like a really dark background with a really bright white fine text, is really hard for me to read. And from a cognitive standpoint and from a physical standpoint, because my eye muscles are affected, it leaves ghosting and things like that.
Now, another one in terms of cognitive load is if your site is too busy, you're taking the risk of losing your visitor, and sometimes immediately. Here's what Holly Schrader talks about here.
I will navigate away immediately if something is visually busy, whether it's got its movement or color or design that's just kind of cramped. It's just too much stimuli all at once. I get really overwhelmed feeling, and then it's like like I can't process properly. And then that interferes with task completion for whatever it was I was trying to do when I went there in the first place.
And then Holly moves on, and then so many people move on. Along similar lines, here's a little bit more about noisy pages and how they're problems for folk with ADHD like Ben Lesh. Ben points out that if we provided user preferences like toggles to let users display what they want, his ability to use our pages would be greatly improved.
Another thing that gets me sometimes is just very noisy interfaces or things where there's just walls of text. Like any sort of productivity tool or productivity website that gives me too much information actually gives me a little bit of anxiety to look at. But for me personally, it would be great if, there was maybe fewer distractions or less noise on particular tools and pages. If I could toggle that sort of stuff, that'd be great.
Now, the last soundbite I'd like to leave you on is from E.J. Mason. His words really touch on why I think this is also important.
It's important to remember that people with disabilities come in a variety of packages they might not expect, and they might have experiences that go outside the really common narrative of this. Someone is totally blind, or someone is a wheelchair user, or someone is totally deaf. Those experiences are all really important, but I think that if we forget that there's a wide profile of people with a wide variety of barriers, we can miss a lot of things that can help people.
It's about individual conditions. It's about cross-sectionality. It's about thinking about things in a different ways and trying to expand your knowledge so you have a greater understanding, so you are able to address more and different aspects of accessibility. Now, I've talked a lot, and I'd like to leave you with some homework. Think about one element of this presentation that really struck you. Consider what you're going to do about it. Yes, you. How are you going to implement that in your work? How are you going to spread that message that accessibility is beyond the guidelines? Accessibility is important for everyone. So that's me. That's wrapped up. I'm happy, obviously, to answer any questions you have. If you're anything like me, it will take some time for you to think of these questions. So you can reach me I'm easy to find on my website, via email. I'm on LinkedIn. I should have put a link there, but unfortunately, I left Twitter a couple of years ago because dumpster fire. Anyway, opening the floor for questions.
Nick, thanks so much. This was really fantastic. I'll get to questions. I'll summarize a few comments in the chat. There's been a really good conversation running there as well. The first question is, I think, a really important one. How do you speak with clients and support/encourage them to build a sustainable accessibility culture? I'd love to understand what that conversation looks like for you. And goes on to say, I see the desire for an audit and lots of starting with the basics. You mentioned explaining alt text over and over, but then it gets stuck at that point, or nothing happens, or standards aren't maintained. So yeah, I'm interested in that as well, and I might kind of have a follow-up to that too.
That's such a important question in the context of what we do. Most of our clients come to accessibility either because they've been sued or they have a fear of being sued. Most of our clients come to accessibility with an understanding that they're going to get an audit, they're going to fix things that have been found in the audit, and that's them done. This accessibility as a project mentality is prevalent everywhere. And changing that mentality is something you cannot do in a one-off engagement. If you have 2 weeks of work or a month of work or even 6 months of work with a client, you're not likely to be able to get there. I've been working with some clients for literally years before I'm able to push that needle, trigger that barrier, that moment of understanding that goes, aha. And typically, the way to get there is to show them, make them hear, share usability studies, share my podcast, get them to understand the real human impact of something that has happened. And if you have the budget, one of the great things is, sure, have that audit, get that remediation done, get things validated, and then once everything in the audit has been checked, do usability studies and share those videos with your client, because they'll realize, oh my God, we built this interface. It is 100% accessible. Our internal accessibility auditor said so. Our third-party auditor said so. And then we have this screen reader user who actually can't use this interface. Once they see that, that's when the idea of all these things I was talking about starts crystallizing in the client's mind.
Yeah, and it can take quite a while to steer clients away from accessibility whack-a-mole, right? Where it's, hey, let's just fix these things in the evaluation report and we'll be good. And getting them to broaden to think about you need an ecosystem, you have to have leadership to pull this off. And so it's, I think, a recurring challenge for all of those of us who are in this space. The next question is, respecting user OS preferences such as dark mode, prefers reduced motion, dim flashing lights, etc., preferred for people, or manual customization? And you spoke to that a little bit, but might you expand on that a little as well?
It's a multi-layer thing, really. First, yes, respecting the operating system preference. This is just like a basic thing. Then we have the idea of providing everyone with ways to customize their experience. It can be switching dark mode on or off if they don't have things set at operating systems. Because I'm going to digress here, but I think a lot of people that have accessibility needs, A, don't necessarily consider themselves disabled, even though they may be, and B, may not actually know all the features available to them. There's a lot of people that have, for example, vestibular disorders that don't know they can set prefer reduced motion. So if we put accessibility features or preferences, or however we want to phrase it, as a set of preferences, then the user can choose what they're doing. And I would not generally recommend doing that necessarily on a website, but if you're building an app that someone is going to have to use over and over and over and over, please provide people with a way to set preferences, because it makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Next question is, do you have any getting started resources for learning more about cognitive disabilities?
The first stop would probably be the WHY Web Accessibility Initiative working group has some good information about cognitive accessibility. Although I've actually had some arguments with them around the fact that some of their content is written in a way that is actually not accessible to people with cognitive impairments. But that's a side discussion. I think that's really the first port of call. I think it's important to educate ourselves about the various conditions that are considered cognitive impairments, whether it's dyslexia, dyscalculia, whatever else. But bottom line, if you're really getting started, understanding the kind of things we have to do to reduce the impact is more important than understanding the specific disabilities.
I think that's fair. And I know the Web Accessibility Initiative is really trying to focus more on that. It's interesting you talk about the reading level of the site, because we talk about that in our training as well, that generally the reading level is pretty high throughout all of their documentation. This is another good question. All these are really good questions. Are there any tips on how to create awareness between the colleagues who think they already know accessibility enough, but doesn't really think it through?
Yeah. I've been grilled a lot years and years ago when I was working. I wasn't working directly in web accessibility, but I was working in the field of the independent living movement for people with disabilities. And I kept saying, disabled people need disability awareness training. And they're saying, oh, I know all there is to know. No, you don't. And it's very difficult to educate someone about aspects of a topic that they think they are good at. And it can be difficult. The way I would approach that is I would try to find one element that they're saying that is wrong or inaccurate, and I would find ideally testimonials from disabled people, to use disabled people's own words to make them realize, oh well, maybe I'm not as aware as I thought I was. And once you crack that door open a little bit, then that lets the discussion happen. But I also think it's important not to put their backs up, because once you start putting their backs up, you've lost the game.
Yeah, and it can be pretty easy, at least in my experience, with folks that don't see the things that they don't know, right? Or that don't believe that they don't know something. They can assume a defensive position pretty quickly, in my experience too. So that's, I think, another tricky part of it. I have just a quick follow-up. Other than your podcast, I haven't found too many non-proprietary places to find UX research that includes disabled people. And I wonder if you have any suggestions for where our audience might be able to go to try to get some of that if they're in a position where they're not going to be able to afford to either perform it themselves or, you know, pay for something behind a paywall.
I think the availability of data out there is very, very small. I always say, hey, you know, do usability study with disabled people, and even identifying disabled people to do this is difficult if you're not connected. And I mean, we have Access Works by Knowbility, which is doing great work. There's Fable, which is doing great work, but unless you have 50 grand a year to do a subscription and you're at enterprise level, you really can't depend on them. There's a few smaller outfits. I know one in British Columbia called Easy Surf. They're starting to do that. But if you're trying to find stuff out there, I'm not saying this to boost my ego, but I really think my podcast is the only resource out there that I'm aware of.
And particularly to have that recorded insight. And several people in the chat mentioned how much they appreciated, you know, hearing the first person stories, first person, right, and not just a retelling. There's a follow-up on the conversation about the bigger picture, you know, organizational really maturity with accessibility. How do you build ownership of accessibility for the companies you work with? And they go on to say sometimes clients want it to be one person's job, understandable where you need an expert, but advocating for some things to be everyone's job is something that Caitlin is working on.
Yeah, it goes back to this idea of building a culture of inclusion, making people realize it's not just audit fix whack-a-mole. It takes time to build this culture, and what I really like to do is talk to people about building a network of champions within the organization. And I do it even though it's not something that the organization necessarily does specifically. As I'm working with people, I quickly realize, oh, this designer is showing interest and this developer is starting to think on their feet. So I focus a lot of my attention on these people to build their knowledge. And once we have enough people, whether it's 5 people or 10 people or 20 people, you start building that network that may be unofficial to start, but suddenly it becomes part of, you know, almost the DNA of the organization, because there's more and more people that are interested. It's like enthusiasm is contagious. And once people realize that they can do a lot for accessibility without needing to be receiving budget necessarily for it, or without needing a specific epic for it, then it just comes in and it just works. But it takes time to get there.
Yeah, it's a lot quicker if you figure out how to make it top down, but that's a whole other question, right? Like, how do we, and somebody touched on this in the chat, that a lot of the time leadership isn't willing to let people even invest time, right? And that's one of the things I think that is a challenge for a lot, maybe of our audience, is, okay, we can start grassroots, but how far can we go with that? I know for a lot of our clients, that's sometimes a bit of a frustration for some on technical and non-technical teams who are really trying to push from the ground up, and it can be challenging and certainly take quite a lot of time. The final question that we have in the Q&A is, are there any studies or figures that show that making things, web, docs, etc., accessible makes it better for all users? I think showing that it's worth the time, effort, work would go a long way in getting decision makers on board. What are your thoughts on that?
This is a difficult topic. I have been quote unquote selling accessibility for 30 years with this idea that it's good for everyone. I started pointing out that curb cuts designed for wheelchair users are good for parents with strollers. They're good for kids on skates. They're good with delivery people with dollies. And I think it's the same way around accessibility. It just makes a site easier to use and at the same time, there's a very strong segment of the disability community that are saying, and rightly so to a point, that if we're selling as accessibility as it's good for everyone, we are actually forgetting or erasing the disability experience, because accessibility is first and foremost about disabled people. So it's a very difficult balancing act to conduct. I don't know any specific studies or cases written out there that specifically talk about that, but I use a lot of common examples. You know, if we're talking about target size for someone who has CP, well, it's easy to equate that to someone who's trying to book something on a website on their cell phone and they're in a bus and everything moves. So if we can start pulling parallels between, hey, contrast on a website is important for people with low vision. Contrast is important for people looking at your website on their cell phone outside in full sun. We pull these real life example, and you know, once you start finding them, we just can't stop. So that to me is perhaps as important and as effective than specific studies out there. Just have that discussion with people and start getting them to think about, hey, okay, I've given you couple examples. So what can you think is a parallel for non-disabled people if we're talking about, hey, why heading hierarchy is important?